Hello everybody and welcome back to another video today. I am going to be doing my picks for the first weekend of the Summer Showdown qualifiers. Once again, we are back with another tournament cycle, fresh to begin. No more hero pools, they are gone. New map pool, which is pretty much all the same maps we've seen, just some of them not being played this time around. So we're going to jump into my Summer Showdown picks, of course, as I'd always do, but I want to start this one off just by giving you kind of a little mid-season update on where things are currently at with the league standings. So I'm going to throw up the different regional standings. You'll see the NA region on the left, APAC region on the right. NA region, Dallas Fuel, despite having a worse record than 3 other teams in the Overwatch League NA region, sitting at the top thanks to their performances in the tournaments and the 5 additional points they have gained in tournaments. While on the other side, you have the Shanghai Dragons with their 5 additional tournaments points, sitting at the top with 11 points. They have a 5-point lead over the next highest team, which is the Seoul Dynasty. It'll be very hard for the Dynasty to overcome that deficit. NA side, Dallas Fuel with a 3-point lead over the Shock and Outlaws. So definitely doable over there. I think the competition in NA is a lot more open. I could definitely see a world where the Dallas Fuel miss a tournament cycle if the meta favors a Shock or the Gladiators, the Justice. You know, these teams that I think have been looking pretty good. Definitely could see them potentially knocking out the Fuel from contention for one of those tournaments. So that's where things are currently with the standings. But let's move on. Let's jump into my picks for this week. I'm going to try to give you my predicted scores for this one. Just see if you guys like it or not. Of course, every single month they have the pick'ems for the Overwatch League, so I fill those out every week. So I'm just going to give you basically what I picked for those matches, and whether or not they're right, we'll find out over time. But let's jump in. Let's start with the Western region and the matches we have on Friday. Kicking us off is the London Spitfire taking on the Paris Eternal. Now this is an interesting one. The London Spitfire, one of the weakest teams so far this season, have not managed a single match win. Paris Eternal had a pretty good June Joust, 2-2, but definitely improved from where I think people thought they would be. People thought they'd be a pretty weak team, considering the fact they also lost 2 of their starters and they had to bring in 2 new players. Quite impressive performances from the Paris Eternal so far this season. The London Spitfire do have Sparker joining this roster, so they do have at least one new piece that will help them potentially go for some big wins down the stretch. But I don't personally think it is enough to take the win away from a very good-looking Eternal team. I think Sparker will help the Spitfire a lot. I think that this will be probably a somewhat closer affair than what it would have been in months previous. But I'm still going to give this one to the Eternal, and I'm going to say they take this one 3-1. Could definitely be a 3-2, but I'm going to go with a 3-1 for Paris for this one. Moving on to the second NA game from Friday, and my first big pick game of the weekend. It is the LA Gladiators taking on the San Francisco Shock. Now this is a very interesting series. About 3 days ago, I would have had a very different opinion on this match than I do today. But of course, we now have the news that Striker has retired and Ants has returned to the Shock. So one player leaves, a new player joins, or a returning face joins after unretiring. So it's an interesting one to kind of figure out. With Tracer back in the meta, and I think Tracer will probably be a very big played hero, the loss of Striker is a huge one for the Shock. Most likely, the Tracer player on this team going forward is Glister. Glister played a lot of Tracer in the past. He's played Tracer in the Overwatch League. Of course, he played it when he was with London. He's a pretty good Tracer. You would think he would be their Tracer player. I don't really know how good Ance's Striker is, or Ance's Tracer is, because Striker played it so much, because it's his best hero. So I don't really know if he will play it at all. I don't expect him to play it. I think that he is going to primarily be their Widowmaker, Ashe, McCree type of player. And I think a big part of the reason for that is because that gives Glister more freedom to play the roles that I think he is better at. Glister is a good hit scan player. He is a good sniper. Like, he can play those heroes. But I genuinely think he is more comfortable when he can play the Tracer, the McCree, and not as much the long-range hit scans. So I think that the addition of Aunts is actually pretty helpful for Glister when he can kind of be a little more comfortable in what he gets to play. The Gladiators, on the other hand, I think have been looking a lot better recently. I think they've been improving a lot so far this season. And for the past, since these teams played in week 1 of the season, I think the Gladiators have gotten much, much, much better. The Shock have concerned me. I think that the fact that they've had this big roster move, though seemingly it's been in the works for at least a few days now, could be a big blow to this team, and it could require some changes. I think it'll be a close series. I am going to predict a 3-2 match for this one, but I am going to give this one to the Gladiators, who I just feel a little bit more confident in their ability to take this one away. Based on kind of what we've seen from the Shock recently, I think the Gladiators have looked a lot better, despite the fact that they lost to the Dallas Fuel, and the Shock beat the Dallas Fuel. Different metas, and I think the Gladiators have looked much better recently, and I think they should be able to take this one, but it'll be close. Moving on to Saturday, we'll start in the APAC region. We have the Hangzhou Spark taking on the LA Valiant. Relatively straightforward one for this one. The Hangzhou Spark have looked overall pretty good. They haven't been perfect. They've struggled at times. Obviously losing to the NYXL in the June Joust knockout rounds. Certainly one of those instances where they struggled. They have struggled a lot against the NYXL this season. New York haven't looked the best. But the Valiant have won 2 maps all season. This should not be a difficult one for the Hangzhou Spark. I am picking them to win this series 3-0. Next is the Seoul Dynasty, taking on the Chengdu Hunters. They played recently. I believe they played in the last weekend of the June Joust. I'm not 100% positive, but they did play very recently. And it was a close series that the Seoul Dynasty ended up pulling away 3-2. I think that should be the same or similar result. Big difference, though, of course, is the hero pools are now back in effect, and so Tracer's back in the pool. Leaf played a very good Tracer in the May Melee, and when these two teams played in the May Melee, the Seoul Dynasty were unable to beat the Chengdu Hunters, obviously. So, in theory, this should be a better meta for Chengdu, because it's going back to what worked for them when they were able to play it in the May Melee. Obviously, there's been some patches. Some of the heroes may not be exactly the same in terms of how good they were, but I just think Seoul has looked better more consistently. Chengdu had a pretty serious dip in the June Joust. Seoul, I think, has been very consistent. Their losses this season are to the Fusion, the Hunters, and the Dragons. So they still look pretty good. So for me, close one, but I'm going to go 3-2 for the Seoul Dynasty. Final APAC match for Saturday. NYXL take on the Guangzhou Charge. The NYXL played the Guangzhou Charge a few weeks ago. I believe it was the it was the first week of qualifiers for the June Joust. The Guangzhou Charge were able to win that one. New York had just come off a big win against the Philadelphia Fusion. I think there was probably an element of, I don't even know how to best say it. I guess just kind of they got a little too caught up in their victory the day before and kind of fell behind in the second match of the weekend. I think that is not something that they should do again. They're good. They're very good at times, but it's a weird series. I think the NYXL should win this one. I think they've looked better. I think they've looked more consistent, which is saying a lot because they have not looked super consistent. But they've had better performances against some kind of upper level teams. So I'm going to say this is a 3-1 for the NYXL. Could definitely be a 3-2. Could definitely be a series that goes the distance. But I'm going to say 3-1 for the NYXL. They're coming off a pretty respectable performance, getting as far as they did in the June Joust. Obviously didn't go their way once they actually made the top 4, but what can you do? They've gotten where they are, and I think that they've just looked more consistent, and they've looked better. So that's something I am going to go for with the NYXL. Moving on to NA for Saturday, the London Spitfire are taking on the San Francisco Shock. I don't see this one being very close. The Shock should win this one pretty easily. Even with the changes to their roster, they're still a really good team. They've only lost one regular season game. They're not going to lose to a London Spitfire team that just has not looked good all season. So I'm going the way of the Shock for this one. Next NA match is the Florida Mayhem taking on the Toronto Defiant. Two teams that had a good May Melee and a rough June Joust. Toronto Defiant had a little bit more external factors that obviously contributed to that, having some issues with COVID and having to bring in a new player like Aspire. There definitely were some issues for the Toronto Defiant, so you can't fully blame it on their play. Mayhem just did not look super comfortable, though they did play a relatively tough schedule as well, having to play the Outlaws and the Justice, and I think they also played the Shock, maybe? I could be wrong about that. But they played a pretty tough set of teams. So I think they are still a good team. I think they should be a team that has what it takes to beat the Defiant. I have not really been super high on the Defiant. I have not really bought into the Defiant yet this season. I never really did. In the May Melee, their schedule was really easy. You know, with the exception of the Atlanta Reign, they didn't really beat a good team. And even then, Atlanta Reign were questionable then, and it was a reverse sweep that they had to do. So it was a tough one. It's a very tough team to kind of judge. I haven't bought into them. I still am not super high on them, so I'm going with the Mayhem. I think the Mayhem are the better team. I think they're going to win this one, and I'm going to say it is a 3-1 victory for them. Final NA match for Saturday is the Boston Uprising Vancouver Titans matchup. I think that this is one that's going to go the way of the Uprising. Uprising have looked pretty good. I'm curious to see what they do now that Tracer is going to be back in the meta. That was the thing that they struggled with the most when they were running Valentine on the Tracer, but you can hope that he has spent some time workshopping the Tracer and has gotten a little bit better. And that is definitely something that I am going to be looking out for with the Uprising, is how well they look on Tracer. But the Titans are not a very good team. They also have not won a single match yet this season, much like the Spitfire and the Valiant. So Uprising should be able to find this win relatively easily. I think they are a better team. Definitely there's Tracer concerns, but they have just gotten better as the season's progressed. Gable, she has done a lot to help this team out, so I'm ready to see the Uprising take that next step and become a team that's going to fight some of these top-level teams, but we'll see what happens. Of course, they do have a pretty tough road ahead of them beyond this year's the Titans, but this one shouldn't be too hard for them. Moving on to Sunday in the APAC region, the first series is the Hangzhou Spark taking on the Seoul Dynasty. This is my second big pick series of the weekend. The Spark, like I said before, struggled down the stretch in the June Joust, obviously falling to the NYXL in a series that very much should have been theirs to take. The Dynasty have struggled in those big tournament matches, but in the regular season have been relatively consistent. So these two teams have a pretty similar trajectory. They are now meeting head-on, and it's going to be a very interesting clash. I think it'll be interesting to see what styles these teams opt for. With Reinhardt back in the meta, you'd expect rush metas to be somewhat prominent and prevalent, but I think that the interesting one with this one is that neither team really favor the Reinhardt. They both favor the Winston. So it'll be interesting to see if both teams do play the Winston, if one of them decides, hey, let's actually play the Reinhardt. We know that Marvel is a very good Reinhardt for the Seoul Dynasty. Will they favor that over the Winston? There's options they have there. There's a lot more flexibility from what we've seen from the Seoul Dynasty in that main tank position that they are willing to try. The Spark have been pretty comfortable just kind of running the Winston. So this one is one I'm keeping my eyes out on. I think it should be pretty close. I think these two teams are pretty evenly matched. But I do think the Seoul Dynasty are better. I think they edge out the Hangzhou Spark ever so slightly and take a 3-2 win for this one. Second APAC match on Sunday is the Chengdu Hunters taking on the Guangzhou Charge. Guangzhou, not feeling the best about them. Chengdu, as much as they did kind of struggle in the June Joust, they've looked a lot better in the May Melee. Like I said before, meta should be somewhat similar. I just think that they are the better team than the Guangzhou Charge this season, and I think that the Chengdu Hunters should take this one 3-1. I'll give the Guangzhou Charge a map, but I think this is a pretty easy win for the Chengdu Hunters. Final APAC match of the weekend is the NYXL taking on the LA Valiant. You all know how this one went the last time these two teams played. NYXL speed ran the LA Valiant and set the second fastest match time ever. I don't expect the LA Valiant to be super competitive with the NYXL. I think the NYXL have been probably, if I had to guess, putting in as much work to try to improve after their lackluster performance in the June Joust tournament. I don't think they're a team that's going to struggle so much that they fall to the LA Valiant, so I am giving the NYXL the win here in a 3-0 fashion. Move over to NA, we have a rematch between the LA Gladiators and the Paris Eternal. This was a pretty interesting match. For the last time they played was one I was pretty excited for. It was a decently close match. I think it was a 3-1 the last time around. I'm predicting a 3-1 again for the Gladiators. I think the Gladiators look really good. I think that they are a really good team. I do think the Eternal are a strong team. I still think they have a lot of talent and potential on that roster. Obviously, now that Tracer's back, we might get to see some Suna Tracer, and I think Suna's Tracer is so good. Getting to see it back in May when they would run it, I thought it was a really, really, really good look for this team. So I like what this team has done. I feel very good about this team, but I think the Gladiators are just too much of a strong team, and I think they will take this one 3-1. Next is the Boston Uprising taking on the Florida Mayhem. Two teams that I think could be pretty evenly matched, but the key difference here is that in a Tracer meta, you know Yaki is going to bring his all. The Mayhem, in my opinion, are a very meta-dependent team. As long as Tracer is playable, Yaki is going to be a really, really, really good player. He's going to contend with the best in the league. With Striker out of the league, there's now an argument to be made that Yaki is the best Tracer in the Overwatch League. Is he? Only time will tell at this point in time. Now that this vacuum has been created, we'll see kind of who fills that void. You have people like Yaki, you have people like Dante, who have kind of made their name playing the Tracer. So now it comes down to which one of them is the best of them all. Boston, we know, have struggled on Tracer. Who knows if that'll still be a thing going forward. They may have kind of spent a lot of time improving it. I get the feeling this series will be kind of close. This series really could be, this could be a 3-1 for the Mayhem. It could easily be a 3-0 for the Mayhem. I think if the Uprising want to win this series, it has to be close. I don't see them kind of dominating the Mayhem. But I do think the Uprising are a pretty good team. I think they're solid. I think they're on a pretty similar level to the Mayhem. That Tracer difference really is kind of what I'm looking out for. So I'm saying this is a 3-2. I don't feel the most confident in that guess, but I could see a world in which the Uprising are able to take a couple maps off this Mayhem squad and make it close. But I do think the Mayhem should be favored pretty strongly in this one. Final match of the weekend is the Toronto Defiant taking on the Vancouver Titans. I'm going with the Toronto Defiant on this one. 3-1 win in my eyes. Toronto isn't the best, which is why I think there is a good chance that the Toronto Defiant are unable to sweep the Titans, because the Titans have been able to take maps in the past, and I think they should be better in this stage in this month than they were last month. Obviously, Chongsik has now been worked into the roster a little bit more, so I think there's a good possibility this team will be better than they were. This is, I think, a pretty good chance for Vancouver if they want to get that first match win, if they want to get their fans those breadsticks. This is the match where I think it has the most, the highest chance of happening, whether that be a boop from Fire or a 5-map series, which is also, I think, decently likely in this one. Either one of those options, I think, are possible, but I think the Defiant are stronger, and I think they will take this installment of the Battle of the North. So that's it for my picks for this week. If you enjoyed, consider liking and subscribing for more videos like this in the future. Comment down below whether you agree, disagree with my picks, your own picks, whatever you want to leave. Love to hear that from you. I will have my picks overall, just so you can see them a little bit. They should have been up already. Anyway, that's all from me for today, so thank you so much once again. I hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.